"Don't you dare tell me you did this for me," she shouted, voice cracking through the echo of sirens. Her hands trembled. The man across from her, drenched, shivering, eyes wild, whispered, "You were never supposed to find out this way, Layla." The red and blue lights strobed across their faces. Between them, the little drawing that had fallen from her coat pocket was already melting in the puddle, a child's sketch of two people holding hands. "Who are you, really?" she asked, barely a whisper. "Now let me tell you how this incredible story unfolded. But before you continue, take a quiet second. Become part of this journey. Subscribe. Not just to follow a channel, but to stay connected. Share your heart in the comments. And tell me where you're watching from, because your support keeps these stories alive. Now, let's begin. Every morning at 6:45 a.m., before the city had fully shaken off the night, Caleb Rivers loaded his daughter's pink lunchbox into the back seat of their old Subaru, grabbed his travel mug of coffee, and drove down the same block in Brooklyn Heights. He always stopped at the corner by Atlantic Avenue, right across from the Trader Joe's, where a woman sat quietly on a bench near the subway entrance. She never begged. She just sat, coffee cup in her hands, gaze fixed somewhere far away. Caleb first noticed her in late September, when autumn light turned the city gold. He'd been running late to drop his 7-year-old daughter, Ellie, off at PS 261, and the woman had dropped her coffee cup. Coins spilled everywhere. Caleb's reflex had made him stop. He knelt, gathered the quarters, and smiled. She didn't ask for help. She just said softly, "Thanks. You didn't have to." He'd nodded and gone on with his morning. But something about her stillness, her pride, stuck with him. By the third morning, he started bringing an extra coffee. By the fifth, a wrapped sandwich. And by the second week, Ellie had begun waving to her from the back seat, calling out, "Hi, pretty lady." The woman had smiled then, the kind of smile that looked like it hadn't been used in a long time. Caleb was 38, a carpenter by trade, raising Ellie alone after his wife's passing 3 years prior. His life was measured in routines and repairs, things he could fix. The woman on the bench, on the other hand, looked like someone the world had stopped fixing long ago. She was in her early 30s, with coffee-colored skin and sharp, beautiful eyes that carried exhaustion like a secret. She wore the same long tan coat, no matter the weather. "Morning," Caleb said one day, setting down the coffee beside her. She hesitated. "You really don't need to do this." "I know," he said, smiling gently, "but I want to." That morning, she finally told him her name. Layla Monroe. Days turned into weeks. The conversations grew, first about the weather, then about books, then about nothing and everything. Layla never said where she went after she left the bench, but Caleb noticed she always disappeared around 8 a.m. Sharp, blending into the crowd, heading toward the subway. One morning, as he dropped Ellie off, she said, "Daddy, does Miss Layla have a home?" He hesitated. "I think everyone has a place they go to, sweetie." "But she looks sad," Ellie said. "You look sad too, sometimes." That cut deep. Caleb didn't respond, but the words followed him all day at work. Then came the morning everything shifted. It was early December. Snow dusting the streets. Layla wasn't on the bench. For the first time in 3 months, the space was empty. Caleb felt something uneasy settle in his stomach. He waited the next day. Still nothing. By the third morning, he parked and stepped out into the cold, scanning the block. That's when he heard the sound, a cough, faint and desperate, coming from the alley beside the deli. She was there, slumped against a wall, shivering, her tan coat soaked. "Layla," he shouted, rushing to her. She tried to speak, but her lips were blue. Without thinking, he scooped her up and carried her to his car. Ellie's blanket wrapped around her shoulders. "Hospital," he muttered to himself, gunning the engine. When she came 2 hours later in a white hospital bed, she looked up at him, eyes glassy. "You shouldn't have helped me," she whispered. "Why not?" She hesitated, something flickering behind her gaze, fear, guilt, something else. Caleb sat back, uneasy but unable to look away from her. She wasn't just a stranger anymore. She was a mystery he'd already started caring about far too much. Have you ever helped someone without really knowing their story and wondered later if you'd still have done it if you knew the truth? Maybe that's where all real kindness begins. The hospital room smelled of antiseptic and cheap coffee. Snow pressed against the window like static. Caleb sat in the plastic chair, elbows on his knees, watching Layla sleep beneath a tangle of ivy lines. She looked smaller now, her strength folded inward. When she stirred, he straightened. "You're safe," he said quietly. She blinked, scanning the room. "How long?" "Since yesterday." "Mild pneumonia." "You scared the hell out of me." Her lips parted in a half-smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You didn't have to do that." "Yeah, you keep saying that," he replied. "And yet here we are." 2 days later, the doctor discharged her, warning she shouldn't be alone. Caleb didn't even think before he said, "You can stay in my spare room until you're steady." Layla froze, stunned. "That's not, you don't even know me." "I know enough to see you need a warm place," he said. "And my daughter already asked where you went." She studied him a long moment, then sighed. 1 week. That's it. Caleb's apartment sat above a bakery in Cobble Hill. The air smelled of cinnamon and rain. Ellie squealed when she saw Layla step through the door, tiny arms wrapping around her leg. Layla laughed, really laughed for the first time. "You must be Ellie. I drew you something." The little girl ran off to fetch crayons. Caleb watched from the kitchen doorway, a strange warmth building in his chest. For months, the apartment had been quiet, except for cartoons and the hum of the fridge. Now, there was life again. Still, Layla moved through the space carefully, like a guest in a museum. She washed dishes that weren't hers, folded blankets no one asked her to. One evening, as Caleb hammered a shelf in the living room, she spoke softly. "You built this place yourself, didn't you?" He nodded. "Helps me think." "Must be nice," she said, "to fix things." He looked up. "You sound like you've tried." Layla's gaze drifted to the window, to the city lights trembling across the glass. "Some things don't want to be fixed, Caleb." Over the next few days, pieces of her slipped out like notes from a torn letter. She knew art galleries uptown, could quote Baldwin and Morrison, spoke with the polish of someone educated far beyond her current circumstances. But when he asked about family, her eyes hardened. No one worth mentioning. One night, Caleb found her in the kitchen, staring at her phone, hands shaking. A photo flashed briefly before she locked the screen, a teenage boy in a school uniform. "Your son?" he asked gently. Her face drained of color. "Please, don't." He stepped back. "Okay." She left the kitchen silently. From his room he heard muffled sobs through the thin wall. By Friday she insisted on leaving, saying she had errands. Caleb didn't stop her. But as he drove Ellie to school, he saw Layla on the platform below Atlantic Avenue, standing dangerously close to the yellow line. He parked illegally, ran down the stairs, and pulled her back just as the train roared in. "What the hell, Layla?" he shouted over the noise. She wrenched free, tears streaking her cheeks. "You think you're saving me? You have no idea what I've done." "Then tell me." "I can't," she whispered, "because once I do, you'll never look at me the same." The train doors closed behind them, a gust of cold air swallowing her words. That night she finally spoke. They sat at the kitchen table, the only light coming from the street lamp outside. "My real name isn't Layla Monroe," she began. "It's Layla Carter. I used to work at the Havenbrook Foundation, the billionaire's estate out in Westchester. I handled financial reports." Caleb frowned. "The same Havenbrook that funds half the city's charities?" She nodded. 3 years ago, money started disappearing. Millions. I found the proof, but before I could report it, someone framed me. They made it look like I'd stolen everything. The police chief himself signed the warrant. Caleb leaned forward. "You're saying you're innocent?" "I'm saying I ran, because no one believed a black woman over a billionaire's son." Silence hung heavy between them, broken only by the hiss of the radiator. "Why stay in the city?" he asked. "Because my son's here," she said. He's 16. Foster care took him when I was arrested. I've been trying to see him ever since. Caleb swallowed hard. Does he know? She shook her head. He thinks I abandoned him. The room blurred as emotion surged in her eyes. That's why I sit at that bench. His bus passes there every morning. I just want to see that he's okay. Caleb's chest tightened. Everything about her, the guarded smile, the distance made sense now. He reached across the table, covering her hand with his. You're not alone anymore, Layla. We'll figure this out. She looked at him, disbelief flickering into fragile hope. You'd risk helping me? After knowing all this? He nodded slowly. I already did. For the first time, she didn't pull away. Sometimes the people we're quick to judge are the ones carrying the heaviest truth. If you've ever wished someone would see your story before deciding who you are, maybe this is the moment to stay, to keep listening. The next morning, Caleb drove her back to the bench. She sat there, coffee in hand, as the school bus rumbled by. Through the window, she spotted the boy, taller now, older, but when their eyes met, he froze. For a heartbeat, recognition flickered. Layla's breath caught, tears spilling as she whispered, "He saw me." Caleb smiled faintly, but in the pit of his stomach, a new worry twisted. Because across the street, a black SUV idled, tinted windows glinting in the morning sun, watching them. The black SUV returned the next morning. It was parked half a block down, engine humming, its tinted windows turned toward the bench like dark eyes. Caleb noticed it first. He pulled his Subaru into the curb and leaned forward, watching. You recognize that car? Layla's face drained of color. Yes, she whispered. That's Havenbrook Security. Before he could react, the SUV door opened, and two men in suits stepped out. One spoke into a radio. The other scanned the street. Layla, Caleb said softly. We need to go. But she was frozen, eyes locked on the school bus turning the corner. Her son was on it. She couldn't move. The men started walking toward them. Caleb grabbed her arm. Now, they ran. The streets blurred, sirens, horns, shouting. Caleb cut down an alley, pulling Layla behind him. Her breath came in ragged bursts. They can't arrest you, he said between strides. They won't, she gasped. They'll make me disappear before that happens. He stopped short, stunned by the raw terror in her voice. They ducked into a bodega on Court Street. The owner, an older Dominican man, gave them a wary glance. Caleb bought a prepaid phone, and they hid in the back near the storage room. Tell me everything, Caleb demanded. No more half-truths. Layla nodded, trembling. The man who framed me wasn't just the billionaire's son. It was the police chief's brother. They worked together to cover the embezzlement. I tried to leak the files, but someone intercepted the emails. Next thing I knew, I was the one with the charges. Do you still have proof? A tiny smile ghosted across her face. I never let go of it. It's on a flash drive hidden inside a sketchbook in my locker at the public library on 10th Street. Caleb stared at her, half in disbelief, half in awe. You held on to that for 3 years? I held on to hope, she said. They made their way to the library after dark, keeping to side streets. The city was awash of neon and rain. Inside, the rows of books stood silent as witnesses. Layla led him to the locker near the restrooms. Her hands shook as she twisted the key. The door creaked open. The locker was empty. She froze. No, 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 it was right here. Caleb's stomach turned cold. A voice echoed behind them. Looking for this? They spun. A man in a dark coat stood by the doorway, holding a small sketchbook. He flipped it open casually. You shouldn't have come back, Miss Carter. Layla's breath hitched. Graham Havenbrook. The billionaire's son smiled thinly. You made a mess. The board doesn't like messes. Caleb stepped forward. She's telling the truth. You're the one who stole the money. Graham's smile didn't waver. And who do you think the police will believe, Mr. Rivers? A single father and a fugitive? Or me? He tossed the sketchbook onto the table, a flash drive clattering out. Caleb lunged for it. But Graham was faster. He kicked it across the floor. In the struggle that followed, Caleb shoved him hard into a shelf. Books rained down. Layla grabbed the flash drive and ran. "Go," Caleb shouted. She bolted out the side door just as security alarms blared. By the time Caleb reached the street, flashing lights painted the night, NYPD cruisers closing in. Graham stumbled out behind him, blood at his temple, yelling, "That's him! He attacked me!" Officers swarmed. Caleb raised his hands. "Wait! You're arresting the wrong." They slammed him against the hood of a cruiser. Through the chaos, Layla stood frozen across the street, clutching the flash drive. Their eyes met. She shook her head, tears streaming. "I can't lose you too." He mouthed, "Run." But instead she stepped forward, voice breaking. "He's innocent. I can prove it." An officer turned. "And you are?" She hesitated, then pulled back her hood. "Layla Carter, the woman you've been looking for." The crowd gasped. Cameras flashed. Caleb shouted, "Layla, don't." "I can't keep hiding," she said softly. "Not from him, not from the truth." The officers surrounded her, reading her rights. She didn't resist. As they led her away, she looked back at Caleb and whispered, "Promise me. You'll tell my son." I tried. Then she was gone. Hours later, Caleb sat alone on the station bench, hands cuffed and numb. They'd taken Layla downtown. Graham had vanished into a waiting car. The officer on duty muttered into a phone, "Chief Dawson says keep the girl quiet until the press dies down." Chief Dawson, the same name Layla had mentioned. Caleb's mind raced. He'd heard that voice before at a community fundraiser where he'd built a set piece for the department's charity gala. He realized then the corruption ran deeper than he'd imagined. When the officer turned away, Caleb whispered to himself, "If she's going down, I'm not letting her go alone." He leaned back against the wall, eyes burning. Outside, dawn crept over the skyline. The city carried on, unaware that two broken people had just upended its quiet lies. In that moment, everything Layla had said echoed through him about things that couldn't be fixed. Maybe she was wrong. Maybe some things just needed someone stubborn enough to keep trying. He closed his eyes and whispered, "Hold on, Layla. I'm not done fighting for you yet." The city woke gray and heavy the next morning, rain smearing the sunrise over lower Manhattan. Caleb sat in the cramped waiting area of the 76th precinct, bruised, sleepless, and furious. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Layla's face disappearing behind that patrol car window. He had one name echoing in his head, Chief Dawson. The same police chief who'd smiled at community picnics, whose brother chaired the Havenbrook Foundation. Everything connected now. When the officer finally uncuffed him, Caleb didn't go home. He went straight to his shop, grabbed his laptop, and opened a folder he'd kept for years-old blueprints, invoices, photos from the gala where he'd built the stage backdrop for Dawson's speech. He remembered noticing a security technician swapping cables near the podium that night. Caleb scrolled through the pictures until he found it, a reflection in the plexiglass Dawson's brother handing a flash drive to Graham Havenbrook. Proof. He copied it to a new drive, added Layla's recovered files she'd secretly sent him months earlier in an encrypted email, and slipped both into his pocket. Then he called a number on the side of a bus stop ad he'd memorized years ago. The New York Ledger Investigative Tips Hotline. "Ma'am," he said, when the reporter answered, "I have evidence that could clear a woman you're calling a fugitive and expose two men who think they're untouchable." By evening, the story was everywhere. Whistleblower, framed in Havenbrook scandal. Screens in bodegas and subway cars flashed her photo, Layla Carter, not the thief they'd painted her as, but the accountant who'd tried to save a foundation meant to help children. At Rikers Holding Wing, Layla saw the headline scroll across a TV mounted high on the wall. She pressed a hand to her mouth, trembling. "He did it," she whispered. "He actually did it." An officer appeared at her cell door minutes later. "Miss Carter, you've got visitors." When she stepped into the interview room, Caleb was already there, flanked by two Ledger reporters and a federal attorney. Layla blinked, disbelief mixing with relief. "How?" Caleb grinned through exhaustion. Turns out, I'm pretty good at fixing things after all. Within 48 hours, warrants were issued. Chief Dawson and Graham Havenbrook were taken into custody. Cameras crowded the courthouse steps as Layla walked free beside Caleb, her hand gripping his. Reporters shouted questions, flashes bursting like fireworks. One voice broke through the noise. "Miss Carter, what do you want to say to the people who believed you were guilty?" Layla paused, looked straight into the lenses, and said quietly, "Believe in the quiet ones. The ones still fighting when no one's watching." The crowd fell silent. A week later, snow dusted the playground near PS 261. Caleb stood by the swings, heart hammering. Layla waited beside him, wrapped in a new coat, free but fragile. A social worker's SUV pulled up. The door opened, and a teenage boy stepped out, tall, cautious, eyes familiar. Layla froze. "Jordan," she whispered. He hesitated only a second before running to her. She caught him mid-stride, arms wrapping tight, tears spilling into his jacket. "I'm sorry," she sobbed. "I never stopped trying." "I know, Mom," he said, voice breaking. "Mr. Rivers told me everything." Caleb turned away, swallowing emotion that burned behind his eyes. For the first time in years, he felt the city go quiet around him. That night, they gathered in Caleb's apartment, the same space that had once felt so empty. Ellie sat with Jordan on the couch, arguing over board game rules. Layla moved through the kitchen like she'd always belonged there. When the kids finally went to bed, she stood by the window, looking out at the skyline. "You risked your life for me," she said softly. Caleb shook his head. "No. I fought for what was right." She smiled faintly. "You fixed something that everyone else had given up on." He stepped closer. "Maybe I just needed a reason." Their eyes met. No grand gesture, no cinematic kiss, just a shared breath that said everything words couldn't. Some stories end in headlines, others end in healing. If you've ever walked away from someone because their life looked messy, because helping them seemed inconvenient, remember Layla. Remember Caleb. Maybe the next time you feel that pull to care, you'll stay. And if their courage moved you even a little, subscribe and stay with us too. There are more stories worth fighting for. Weeks later, at a small community art fair in Brooklyn, Layla displayed her first painting in years, a city skyline at sunrise. In the corner, a bench. On it, a coffee cup and a folded blanket. A little placard read, "For those who stopped to help." Caleb stood behind her, Ellie tugging his sleeve. "Daddy," she whispered. "Does this mean Miss Layla's not sad anymore?" He smiled. "Not sad. Just beginning again." Layla turned, eyes shining. "Ready for breakfast?" He nodded. "Always." They walked off through the crowd, hands brushing. The city around them, alive with noise and light and second chances. Thank you for staying with me until the very last moment of this story. If something in it, even a single glance, a breath, a heartbeat reached you, then this story did what it was meant to do. Every view, every heartbeat that listens, keeps this little world of stories alive. So before you go, take a quiet second, become part of this journey. Subscribe, not just to follow a channel, but to stay connected to the next story, waiting to speak to your heart. The next one goes even deeper, more truth, more love, more healing. And it's already waiting for you. Your next story begins right here.